Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockers Club. I'm back again. I've got a cool power supply here from Fractal Design. This is the Ion Plus 660p. It's a 660 watt fully modular power supply. And this is usually the part where I say let's get it out of the box, but as you can see it is already out of the box. So we'll talk about some of the interesting features, but I've been using this for a while now and I really like it. It's been kind of my little workhorse power supply. But anyway, the first thing that stands out, it's got a 10-year warranty, which I really like that. It is an 80 plus platinum, and I'll talk about the efficiency, what that means here in just a little bit. But what I like is it has a couple of modes here. It has a 0 RPM mode, which basically means if there's not much heat going on in the power supply, the fan doesn't run. It doesn't need to run, so it just stays off. Keeps things quiet and saves a little bit of energy, although the fan doesn't really use all that much energy. So you can see the two different curves here. The blue one is in 0 RPM mode, which means as long as you're using less than about 300 watts or a little under 300 watts, the fan is not going to run. And then once you hit around 300 watts, the fan's going to kick up and start moving air through the power supply to cool it. When it's not in 0 RPM mode, the fan pretty much runs at 400 RPMs all the time, and then it picks up as you get more of a load on the power supply. And the actual unit here, it's 150 by 150 millimeters by about 86 millimeters tall, which is pretty standard for power supplies. Now over here, this is, here's your power switch for the unit itself. So you can turn the power on and off. But over here is a small switch. This is the 0 RPM switch right there. So you switch that on and your fan will only run when you get above around 300 watts of power being used. Otherwise the fan stays off, and if you want the 0 RPM mode off, you just switch that off, and then the fan will pretty much run all the time, and then it will increase in speed as you get above 300 watts of power being used. Now it's not terribly fancy. There aren't a lot of graphics or anything on it. It's fairly simple, but a power supply doesn't really need to be all that fancy aesthetically. That's not a bad thing. It's kind of plain, but I like it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now over here's the business end. This is where all the action is happening. And being fully modular, you can see there are no cables connected to it. And I like that because that means that I only have to plug in the cables that I absolutely need, and I don't have a lot of extra cables that I have to try and stash somewhere. So that's one thing I love about a fully modular power supply. And the other cool thing, I like the way they put the sticker on the other side here. If you ever want to do a quick check on the specs, well, you've got them right there attached to this label on the power supply. And here's a quick rundown on the included cables. So of course you get the 24-pin main power supply for your motherboard. There's also a 4x4 12-volt power cable that also goes to your CPU. Then we've got 4 of these PCIe cables. This is what you would use typically to power your graphics card. We've got 10 of the little SATA connectors there. Not 10 separate cables, but there are 10 positions, so you can hook up to 10 SATA-powered devices there. And then there are 4 of these Molex connectors, which not a big fan of Molex, but there are still a few things that use them. And like I said, I've been using this for a while, so there's nothing to really show in the box other than it does seem to come in some nice closed cell foam to protect it, and then your cables are in this nice bag here that zips up. So everything you need is included right here. And the fan they use here is a 140 millimeter fan. Talking about the cables real quick, here's the Molex connector. This end plugs into the power supply, and actually this side over here. And you get 4 Molex connectors. Again, I'm not a big fan of Molex connectors, but there are still a few devices, like I said, that that use them. These cables are really super flexible, and I like that. That really comes in handy when you're doing your system build and you need to make some sharp curves and bends with the cables. And it's 54 degrees in here right now. I haven't turned the heater on, so it's pretty chilly, and these cables should be pretty hard to move, but they're not. They're really pretty flexible. I like that. Anyway, here's one of the SATA cables. So there's one connector there that goes into the back of the power supply, and there are 4 SATA connectors on this cable, 4 on the second cable, and I'm using one of the SATA connectors over there that has two plugs on it, so that means you get 4, 4, and 2, so that's 10 of the SATA connectors. This here is one of the PCIe. You can see it's going over to the graphics card there, but you get 4 of these. So what I'll do here in a little bit is I'm going to try and get this open so we can look inside if you're curious. That way you don't have to do it because you don't want to open these yourself, particularly if you don't have any kind of electronics background. There's some very high voltages in there, very dangerous. If you don't know what you're doing, you do not want to open this. So I'll do it so you don't have to. The other thing is, if once you crack all these seals, you void your warranty. So I highly recommend just not opening your power supply. But it's always fun to load the system up, so I'll go ahead and stress test the graphics cards there and the CPU to put as big of a load on this as I can, and then we'll look at it with the infrared camera. Doesn't really tell you anything, but it's just kind of fun to look and see where the heat is in the power supply. And a quick word on efficiency. There are a lot of online tools that you can use to size your power supply if you're not sure how to do it. And it basically adds the wattage of all of your components. And then there's a recommendation for what sort of range of power supplies that would best fit your application. And one thing you want to keep in mind is future expansion. So if you plan on adding like a second graphics card or maybe upgrading your system later on, but you want to keep your power supply, just try to anticipate what hardware you might be using. But generally speaking, the way your efficiencies work, and this one here, this is the top of the line here, pretty much. This is your 80 plus platinum. What that means is your maximum efficiency is not when you're using the full 660 watts. It happens at about 50% load. So that means if this is rated at 660 watts, that means right around the 330 watt level is where I'm going to be most efficient. So if I've sized my system to use around 330 watts, that means I'm going to operate right there at the most efficient band. Now if I go over that, let's just say I'm pulling 550, 600 watts all the time from this. That just means this will work just fine. That just means it's going to generate a little more heat. It's not going to be quite as efficient as if you sized it to use 330 for this particular power supply. So you want to think about the usage scenario for your system. Most of the components on here, when they're at idle, they don't use a large amount of wattage. But if you've got everything overclocked and you've got this thing cranked up and it's just screaming all the time, of course you want to use a power supply that can handle that load. And I know I just said that the platinum was the top of the line. Actually, there's a titanium rating that's even higher than the platinum here, but it's only a couple of percentage points higher. So if this is 92% efficiency at 50% load, the titanium is like 94%. So it's only a couple more percent. And again, even if you load these things up to 90 to 100%, your efficiency only drops by a few percentage points, 3-4 percentage points. So it's not a huge hit that you take when you load your power supply up towards the maximum. And the whole reason I bring up all this efficiency talk is a lot of times you think bigger is better. So if a 650 watt power supply is good, then wow, an 850 or 1000 or 1100, 1200 watt has got to be even better. And that's not necessarily the case, because you're spending a lot of extra money on horsepower that you're never going to use. So why not spend that money on maybe a nicer graphics card or a nicer motherboard or something else? Now, if you're not familiar with what Fractal Design has in terms of power supplies, they have 2 series, the Ion, which is what we're looking at today, and the Integra. The Integra comes in some different flavors from like 450 to 750 watts. Let's see here. Scroll down. Yeah, there's 750 is the largest one for the Integra. The smallest is 450. And then the Ion here has some more varieties to choose from. So there's a 500 watt at the bottom end all the way up to an 860 watt platinum. So they do have a couple gold series also. And another thing I'll say is not all connectors are created equal. Sometimes these plugs can be a royal pain to get plugged in, but what I noticed with this power supply is they all seem to go in very easily, and I'm not busting knuckles trying to get these things to plug in. They seem to just push right in, a nice click, and I'm not killing myself trying to get this stuff connected. So that's a good thing. So that just tells me that whoever Fractal Design is using to source their sockets and their plugs from, they're definitely keeping their injection mold tooling well maintained. Alright, so I took the load off of everything and the fan stopped. Now right now I've got it in the 0 RPM mode, so when the load is below that threshold of about 300 watts, the fan immediately kicked off, and as soon as I put the load on it, it fired back up. So I will go ahead and put the load on again, and you should see that fan just spool right up. Okay, so the load is on now, and there goes the fan. And of course the fans for the radiator there just went into high gear also. And as soon as I take the load off, we should see the fan, yep, spools back down. So that's a cool feature. And of course if I want to just turn it on, or I should say turn it off, turn the 0 RPM mode off, then the fan just comes on and idles at about that 400 RPM level until the heat or the wattage draw. Let's see if I put the load back on it. Yeah, you can see the fan kick up. And then when I take the load off, it should drop back down, but still stay running. And you can see that it slowed down to that lower limit. And now we'll take a quick look with the thermal camera so you can see everything is stressed out from a loading standpoint. So we've got the maximum load on the system. You can see the heat there on the motherboard. Things are nice and toasty, and then the radiator is also putting out some heat. And now we'll look at the power supply. Again, this doesn't necessarily tell you anything of any great importance. It's just interesting to see the heat, so we can see a little bit of heat. And again, the colors here don't tell you the actual temperature, it's just the differential or the intensity of the temperature. So you can see the red there is warmer than the yellow, which is warmer than the blue. Now we can kind of look down through the top of the power supply and we can see where some of the warm spots are. And then looking at the exhaust side, the back side of the radiator. So it's just interesting with the thermal camera to take a look and see where the heat is. It's interesting that you can see that the, get my hand in there, you can feel just a little bit of warmth on some of the cables. As far as fan noise goes, what I did is I took the load off of the CPU so that these radiator fans don't make any noise. And I put the load only on the graphics cards. And when the fan here is spooled up, there's no fan noise. I can get right up to it. And I mean, you have to put your ear right on the fan, but as far as any concerns about fan noise coming out of your case, wouldn't worry about it. If you check out the Fractal Design website, which I do recommend, and look at their power supplies as well as their other things, they've got some nice cases too. And the thing I noticed was this particular one is a 660p, the Ion Plus 660p. They actually have a Rev W out now, so if you look, you'll see a W. And I don't know exactly what the difference is. It's not unusual for manufacturers to do a slight design change and change the rev, but this is the P. It's been a really good power supply. I've been using it as my test system workhorse, and it's done a fine job. Value-wise, right now retail is about $108 on Amazon, but you know to watch the prices because they change. Newegg is a few dollars more, but I think that's a decent price for the wattage here and the efficiency, the cable coverage. I like the way these are super flexible. But anyway, keep your eyes open for pricing on that. And while I was at the website, I also found they have a really nice picture of the internals, which is better than probably any picture I could take. So rather than take the top off and go to all that trouble, I'll just use their picture. It's a nice high resolution picture that you can see here. It really shows what's going on inside. So I would give this the Overclockers Club Gold Award. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.